The Jacksons' meteoric rise to fame came at an extraordinary price, a cost far greater than long rehearsals or the loss of childhood years. While the world saw them as an iconic family of musicians, the deeper truth behind their journey is far darker than anyone could have imagined. The revelations that continue to surface only add layers of shock to the story of their success. Gary, Indiana, a town that might seem typical to an outsider, was the birthplace of not just their music but also their family's hardships. Privacy was a distant dream in their cramped home, where the lack of space created an unbreakable bond among the siblings. Growing up in a tight-knit, working-class African-American community shaped their identity, especially through music, which was always in the air. Gospel, blues, rhythm, and blues. These sounds reverberated in the Jacksons' lives, becoming the very foundation upon which their future was built. But as his sister has now revealed, it wasn't only the music that shaped her brother's path. It was also the intense, often cruel discipline imposed by their father, Joe Jackson, and the suffocating pressure to be perfect that left scars that would haunt them both for life. The Jackson family's fame was propelled by Joe Jackson's relentless ambition and drive. By 1963, the Jackson 5 were already performing at local talent shows, hoping to gain exposure and recognition beyond their small town. But for the youngest of the siblings, who was just a little boy at the time, the weight of this ambition was too much too soon. He was thrust into the adult world at an age when most children are still discovering who they are. He didn't experience the normal joys of childhood. He had nightclubs, late-night rehearsals, and the constant demand to perform. Outwardly, the family put on a united front, but behind closed doors, the youngest Jackson sibling was losing pieces of his innocence. The simple pleasures that most children take for granted, playing outside, having carefree moments, were denied to him as he was thrust into the glare of the spotlight. Behind all the glitz and glamour, there was a child who was never allowed to just be a child. As the Jackson 5 grew in popularity, they quickly became superstars, playing everywhere from local venues to signing major record deals. Hits like I Want You Back and ABC catapulted them into international fame, but to the outside world, what seemed like the pinnacle of success was far from perfect. The Jacksons were under constant scrutiny, performing tirelessly, and enduring pressures that few could comprehend. Yet, while the public adored their talent and energy, his sister witnessed something different. She saw the toll the fame was taking on her brother. Despite the chart-topping hits and endless applause, behind the scenes, there were sleepless nights, overwhelming pressure to meet expectations, and the unrelenting demands of their father, who pushed them harder than anyone realized. The Jackson family, to the outside world, might have seemed to have it all, but underneath it all, cracks were beginning to form. As the years passed and the Jackson 5 reached the height of their success, those cracks began to widen. His sister's recent revelations paint a much darker picture of what was really going on during his rise to global superstardom. While he may have had the hits, the albums, the record-breaking performances, and the iconic moonwalk, he also had deep personal struggles. He was a man haunted by the scars of his upbringing and the enormous pressures of fame. His sister has shared that the stress of growing up in such a high-pressure environment, coupled with the constant glare of the spotlight, led him down a dangerous path. In her eyes, he was faking it, trying to keep up appearances for the world while struggling with his own fears, insecurities, and deep emotional pain behind closed doors. The fame that brought him so much adoration also demanded sacrifices, and he paid dearly for it. Albums like Off the Wall and Thriller solidified him as the king of pop, but they also trapped him in a metaphorical cage, a cage built on public expectations, constant media scrutiny, and a never-ending demand for perfection. His sister recalls how, despite the success of these monumental albums, he was never satisfied. He was always chasing something more, never feeling like he had truly reached the pinnacle of what he could achieve. His desire for perfection became an obsession, a weight he could never fully escape. And despite all the money, awards, and adoring fans, he never felt free. He was constantly pretending, putting on a show for the world, while the real him, the one who longed for freedom and a break from the pressure, remained hidden away. His true self was buried beneath the mask he wore for the public. The Jackson family's rise to fame, which seemed so glamorous on the outside, was marred by internal struggles and unspoken pain behind the scenes. The pressure of fame wasn't the only burden he carried. There were also deep-rooted issues within the Jackson family. His sister has openly discussed the cruel discipline imposed by their father, which went far beyond what most people knew. While Joe Jackson's strict methods played a significant role in the Jacksons' success, they also left emotional scars that the siblings carried into adulthood. For her, watching her brother endure these hardships was heartbreaking. The man who had once lit up the stage with his energy and joy was now a shell of himself, struggling to maintain the facade of the joyful performer while dealing with the intense emotional toll of their upbringing. But the pain didn't stop with their father's harsh discipline. The anguish her brother carried with him grew as he tried to escape the weight of his past. While the world knew of his battle with painkiller addiction, his sister reveals that his struggles went much deeper than anyone realized. The addiction was merely a coping mechanism, a way to numb the painful memories of a childhood that had never truly been his own. He was fighting the ghosts of his past, the trauma that lingered long after the applause had faded. Even at the time of his death, when he was only 50, he had been carrying the emotional weight of his struggles for decades. From a young age, he had been trying to cope with a life that was never as glamorous as it appeared on the surface. Despite the fame, the wealth, and the adoration of millions, his life was marked by the scars of a past he could never fully escape. Marie delves into the complexities of Michael's relationships, starting with his marriage to Lisa Presley in the 1990s, which seemed like a fairy tale to the public. However, she reveals that the marriage was anything but that. The pressure from the media and the constant scrutiny from everyone around them took a significant toll. Despite Lisa Marie's attempts to be there for him, she says that Michael never truly let anyone in. He was always faking it, desperately trying to maintain the facade of the king of pop, even as everything around him was falling apart. His second marriage to Debbie Rowe followed a similar pattern. Although it was clear that Michael wanted a family, his struggles with addiction and the overwhelming nature of fame made it impossible for him to find real happiness. His children, Prince and Paris, brought him joy, but the stress of trying to be the father he never had while living up to his public image was overwhelming. Marie reveals that he was constantly on edge, always fearful of losing the little happiness he had managed to find. The allegations against him, however, were perhaps the hardest times for Michael. Marie says the accusations of abuse and the relentless scrutiny from the public broke him in ways that he never recovered from. While she acknowledges that Michael wasn't perfect, she emphasizes that the media turned him into a monster, exaggerating every mistake and making it nearly impossible for him to move forward. Despite his flaws, he wasn't the villain they made him out to be. During these difficult times, Michael leaned on Marie more than ever. She was his confidant, the one person he trusted when it seemed like everyone else was against him. But even she couldn't pull him out of the darkness. She recalls how he often told her he felt like he was just going through the motions, pretending to be the superstar everyone expected him to be, while feeling completely empty inside. To her, the man the world saw as an icon was just her broken big brother. In the end, his death in 2009 wasn't just the loss of a pop legend. It was the culmination of years of pain, pressure, and pretending. Marie says that watching her brother in those final days was one of the hardest things she's ever experienced. He was exhausted, struggling to keep up with the demands of fame while battling his health problems. She reveals that he had been seeking help, but it was too little, too late. The substances that were meant to help him sleep ended up taking everything away. Michael's sister has kept his memory alive in her own way, through performing tributes, releasing music, and sharing the good times they had together. However, she acknowledges that it's impossible to ignore the reality of what happened. The man who moonwalked his way into history was also a man who was hurting, someone who never had the chance to live his life the way he wanted. Her story is a reminder that behind every superstar, there is a real person with real pain. Fame elevated him, but it also trapped him, leaving him to fight against both the world and his own fears. Marie's recent confessions about Michael's last days shed new light on the tragedy of his life. The truth is, he spent much of his life pretending to be okay when he wasn't, pretending to be happy when he wasn't, and pretending to be the king of pop when all he really wanted was to be himself. His rise to fame began at such a young age that he never fully understood what was happening to him. The world watched as he transformed from a bright-eyed kid in the Jackson 5 to a global phenomenon. But what the public didn't see were the long nights spent rehearsing, the relentless pressure from their father, and the haunting fear Michael had of never being good enough. Marie shares that Michael always felt like he was chasing something he could never quite reach. The perfection Joe Jackson demanded from his children left him with an insatiable need to prove himself, even when there was nothing left to prove. He was constantly striving to outdo himself, to show the world that he was worthy of the love and adoration they gave him. Marie remembers the early years when the Jackson 5 was just starting to make a name for themselves. They would perform at local clubs, often staying out late into the night, surrounded by adults who were oblivious to the fact that they were just kids. As the youngest of the group, Michael was exposed to things no child should ever have to see. Marie reveals that her brother was often scared, confused, and overwhelmed by the adult world he was thrust into. He would look to her for comfort, but even as his younger sister, she couldn't fully understand the weight he was carrying. As the Jackson 5 gained popularity, the expectations placed on them grew. They signed with major record labels, released hit after hit, and became household names. However, his sister says that with each success came even more pressure. Joe Jackson, their father, was relentless in pushing them to rehearse for hours on end, never allowing them to rest or take breaks. Michael, who was naturally gifted, was always the center of attention, and Joe ensured he stayed that way. Marie recalls how her brother would often cry himself to sleep, exhausted from the constant rehearsals and the burden of having to be the best. He was just a child, but the world demanded that he be more than that. As the star of the group, he bore the brunt of Joe's anger. He was never allowed to make a mistake, never allowed to be anything less than perfect. These experiences left deep emotional scars, and Michael grew up believing that he had to be perfect, that any flaw or mistake would make him worthless. This need for perfection followed him throughout his life, affecting everything he did. When Michael decided to pursue a solo career, Marie says he saw it as a chance to finally be free from his father's control. He wanted to create music that was truly his own, to express himself in ways he never could as part of the Jackson 5. But even as he found success as a solo artist, the pressure never abated. His first solo album, Off the Wall, was a huge hit, but it wasn't enough for him. Marie reveals that Michael was always looking for the next big thing, the next challenge. He wanted to be the best, not just in his family, but in the world. And for a while, he was. Thriller became the best-selling album of all time, and Michael became a global icon. Fame brought him everything he ever wanted. But it also took so much more, as he struggled with loneliness that few people, even his family, truly understood. Marie also discusses the loneliness that came with Michael's fame. Though he had millions of fans worldwide, very few people could truly be called his friends. He was always surrounded by people, but Michael often felt completely alone. The people around him wanted something from him: money, fame, a piece of his success. Marie recalls how her brother would confide in her, telling her that he didn't know who to trust. He wanted to believe that people loved him for who he was, but he always feared that they loved the idea of him, the king of pop, not the man behind the persona. Janet shares how the stress from constant accusations led Michael to rely more heavily on painkillers. It wasn't just the physical pain from years of performing that bothered him, but also the emotional pain from the burdens he carried. Substances became his escape, a way to dull the sharp edges of the overwhelming pain he faced daily. Janet tried many times to help her brother, wanting him to break free from the grip of addiction. But Michael's dependency had taken hold too firmly, and he was trapped in a dangerous cycle that seemed impossible to escape. Janet felt helpless, watching him sink deeper into his struggles with no way to pull him back. While Michael's life is often viewed through the lens of his incredible talent and fame, Janet wants the world to see another side of him, the personal side. She describes him as a gentle soul, someone who sought nothing more than to be loved and accepted for who he was. Yet, the world demanded far too much from him. He gave his all, his very essence, until there was nothing left to give. Today, Janet is committed to keeping Michael's memory alive, reminding people of the man behind the music. She says he was not just a pop icon but a kind, caring individual with deep flaws. Through sharing his story, Janet hopes to highlight the human aspects of Michael's life, showing that he was more than just his public persona. Fame often appears glamorous from the outside, the glitter, the praise from fans worldwide, but Janet points out the heavy price that came with such a life. For Michael, it cost him his childhood, his peace, and eventually, his life. By telling Michael's story, Janet hopes others will understand the heavy toll fame took on him and see that behind every superstar is a real person, struggling and striving just like anyone else. Janet's narrative serves as a stark reminder of the not-so-shiny parts of fame. She wants people to know that Michael dealt with issues that were rarely seen by the public. He battled loneliness, anxiety, and a never-ending stream of criticism that no amount of money or fame could shield him from. Her reflections bring to light the intense scrutiny Michael faced throughout his career, with every move and decision watched and often harshly judged. The constant pressure was exhausting and isolating for him. Despite his superstar status, Michael felt trapped by his fame, unable to live a normal life. Janet also delves into the relationships within their famous family, discussing the complexities of growing up Jackson with all eyes on them from a young age. Despite the challenges, she remembers Michael's deep love for his family and his constant efforts to protect and provide for them. She touches on Michael's creative genius, believing that his music was one of his few escapes from the harsh realities of his life. Through his songs, he expressed his deepest emotions and momentarily freed himself from his troubles. His music, she suggests, was not just entertainment but a diary of his personal journey. Moreover, Janet discusses Michael's philanthropic efforts. Despite his own struggles, he always sought to help others, particularly children. He used his fame to shine a light on issues like poverty and disease, hoping to make a difference in the world. Janet sees this as a testament to his character, an aspect of Michael that often goes unnoticed. As we reflect on Michael Jackson's life through Janet's eyes, we see a complex picture of a man who was thrust into the spotlight at a young age and never truly escaped it. His life was a mix of extraordinary talent, unimaginable pressures, and the simple human desire to be understood and loved.